mate. Hello. Mashed potato! Yes, okay, mate. What a live.
Sorry, mate. Nice day, isn't it?
Lovely sun, eh?
Lovely day, mate. Lovely day.
Messy orbits. Messy orbits.
And would you like to tell us a little bit about what's going on down here today?
Well, this is part of a sort of grassroots campaign that we've been running as Care for the Wild, a charity that's very involved in campaigning against the cull. This is the 7th march we've had of this kind in the last 2 months. You know, we've been from Kettering, Whitney, Bedford, Taunton, Manchester, all over the country, and everywhere we go we're getting more people turn out. We're marching, we're talking about the Badger Cull, we're getting local media coverage in the radio and television, and I think we're really engaging with people up and down the country who are getting increasingly angry about why we're killing badgers in this way.
Absolutely, excellent. It seems to us that problems going on with extinctions at the current time, through our current life period. What would you say about that in relation to this subject?
Well, badgers have lived on this land for over 500,000 years. They are a protected species. They've been protected since the 1970s because of large-scale illegal killing and badger baiting. No one really is certain of the numbers of badgers we have in this country. It could be 300,000-400,000. It's probably not likely to be more than that. Over 50,000 a year get killed on the roads, and a large number are being illegally killed every year by farmers and by badger baiters. So what we're saying is basically killing these badgers to control bovine TB is wrong. It's not going to help control that disease. It's reducing their numbers to a level that could be very dangerous. We could lose badgers from large parts of the country, and that is something we have to take very seriously. So yeah, we are worried about regional extinction of these animals as a result of this cull.
And obviously the badgers are a large part of the ecosystem, and it's quite possible that if we destroy a lot of the badgers, other things that could be pests will obviously, which badgers normally prey on, will get out of hand. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, to a degree. We're not certain. You can't muck around with the ecosystem. You know, they are carnivores. They live predominantly on earthworms. You get a lot of stories about badgers killing large numbers of hedgehogs and ground nesting birds. To be honest, very small numbers of those animals are taken by badgers.
Yeah.
But if you take large numbers of badgers out of the ecosystem, it will have an impact. We're not certain what that will be, but we meddle with nature, and we do so, we have to be very careful.
Excellent. So this cull is, this part of the cull is like, is it some sort of experiment to see if it's actually going to work?
Yeah, the idea of this cull was a pilot. It was to really test the efficiency of killing, of free shooting, which is basically getting these animals up out of the set at night and shooting them, putting baits out to attract them. That's proved to be very, very poor. It's not delivered the numbers of badgers that the shooters expected. If we look at Gloucestershire, they only got about 23% of the 70% target rate they expected in 6 weeks. The costs have gone through the roof because of policing and the protests. They've had to come in with cages to trap the animals, which is much more expensive and time consuming. And if you're caging and trapping the animal, why are you shooting with the shotgun when you could actually inoculate it against TB for the same money?
Absolutely.
So it's an absolutely disgraceful policy.
Absolutely.
It's got no moral justification, no scientific justification, or animal welfare justification at all.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And just in finishing, we've all seen on the news that there's a lot of direct action going on to try and stop these culling. Have you been involved in that at all? Do you know much about that?
Well, let's be clear about it. There's lots of people down in those cull zones that are dedicating their time day and night to protecting badgers, and I've got the most utter respect for that in the cold and the wet. They're sitting on sets and they're protecting animals, some of which might have been in those sets for over 500 years. That's how old some of those sets are. What's going to happen in Gloucestershire over the next 8 weeks as we've extended this cull is the police are going to go in and forcibly remove those people. We're going to see probably direct action conflict we've not seen since the bypass process of the 1990s. To kill badgers. It's crazy. It's costing a fortune. It's not helping control the disease. It's dividing the urban and the country population, and it's just wrong. It's not what we should be doing. You wouldn't have any protests in those zones. You'd have all those people queuing up to help vaccinate these animals. They just don't want to see them killed, and I strongly agree with that view.
I mean, our government seems to be hell-bent on destroying the ecosystem for financial gain at the moment. What would you say about that?
I think there's a problem with government. At the moment you've got the farming and the landowning industries and the fishing industries, all of which have a say over how we manage our population, manage the urban and the country environment. But what they shouldn't do is have a monopoly on the decision making about how we control wildlife. We haven't got enough of a strong say at protecting wildlife in our country. It's not just about badgers, it's about buzzards, it's about hares, it's about bees, it's about all these species that we have concerns about. I think what you're seeing with this whole grassroots Badger Cull campaign is that people are now beginning to stand up and say enough is enough. We want to protect wildlife, not just for our generation, but for generations to come. We're not going to see politicians play Russian roulette with it anymore, and we're going to make this a voting issue at the next election as well.
Brilliant, excellent. Thanks, Martin. Thanks very much.
Not at all.
Cheers, mate. Hello, mate. You obviously feel fairly strongly about this.
Yes, certainly do, yes.
Have you been to many things like this? Is this the first Badger Cull?
No, this is fourth or fifth one.
Fourth or fifth one you've been to, yeah. And you're from, you're local, are you?
Luton we are. We're
Luton, right. So you've come quite a long way for this thing.
Yes.
Right, excellent. It's quite a good turnout today.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. We were,
it's obviously an issue that's heartfelt.
That's right. We're out in Gloucester in the week on Badger Patrol. And we've been to one or two of these. Last one we went to was at Wilton in Oxfordshire.
And was there a good turnout?
Oh, very good.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's obviously a heartfelt issue. Everybody does care about it.
Yes,
We care about our wildlife.
That's
We
right.
don't want the government
That's one thing
to destroy our wildlife anymore for financial gain.
And they will.
And they will. Yeah. Hello, mate. You obviously care quite passionately about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're worried about these badgers.Here are you from? Are you local?
I'm from Milton Keynes.
You're from Milton Keynes. So you've come quite a long way down here to
Little way, yeah. But
protest
it's any
today.
excuse to come to Brighton, really, I suppose.
I suppose that's fair enough. It's a nice day for it as well.
Yeah, it's not bad. A bit blowy, but it's all right.
So you're obviously worried about the badgers.
Yeah.
You're fed up with the government destroying our wildlife for financial gain.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks ever so much, mate. Cheers. Hello, mate. You obviously care quite passionately about these badgers.
Of course.
Have you been involved in any of the direct action to try and stop this cull?
We've been down doing the woody badger patrols in Somerset.
Excellent. So that, are you local?
Guildford.
You're Guildford. So you've come quite a long way to protest today down here.
That's right. He'd be the first one that chose.
Proud and pleased to be able to read a fantastic statement from our Green MP Caroline Lucas today to support you. I'm one of the Green councillors for the city, and I've got some other colleagues here, and welcome to the city that has its first and only Green Council in the UK. So I've got a lovely speech to read here, so please bear with me, it's very heartfelt. Okay. Louder. Okay, I'll keep it up. Is that okay? Can you hear? So it's a pleasure to be here today to read a statement on behalf of our Green MP, Caroline Lucas, who has been leading the parliamentary campaign against badger culling, but who unfortunately cannot be here today. She has asked me to pass on her heartfelt support to all of you who are so committed to protecting Britain's badgers from needless slaughter. Here is what she says. This government should be ashamed of the way it is ignoring public opinion on badger culling, the way it is cherry-picking the research that's already been done and failing to heed the opinions of so many scientific experts, the way it is ignoring a parliamentary vote that I secured and which sent a clear message to ministers that MPs don't back their culling policy, and the way it is constantly shifting the goalposts trying to get the results it wants from those pilot culls. Bovine TB costs the taxpayer around 100 million in testing and the slaughter of animals and compensation to farmers. The scale of the problem is such that it is deeply irresponsible and unfair for the government to gamble with farmers' livelihoods and with the future of one of our best loved wildlife species. This government says it is concerned about the interests of farmers, yet it is asking for them to take all the risks by bearing the main financial burden of a policy that will not deliver on its promises and may even make the problem of cattle TB much worse. Our farmers deserve better, and our wildlife certainly deserves better too. The government has admitted to me in response to parliamentary questions that it has no way of assessing whether the cull methods being used are humane. and it also has no way of knowing how many of the badgers it is killing are infected with TB, and it's not even carrying out any regular post-mortems. Appalling! It is unacceptable that millions of pounds of worth of public money has been spent on conducting and policing these pilot culls when there is no framework in place to assess the impact, as well as plenty of clear evidence that culling will not achieve those desired outcomes. We need to be taking a far more proactive and rigorous approach to controlling the spread of disease from badgers to cattle. That means investment in vaccination, in biosecurity, in improvements to animal welfare and other evidence-based alternatives to culling. We should follow the lead taken by Wales and develop a strategy that puts badger vaccination centre stage, and we should prioritise securing the necessary changes at EU level to allow a cattle vaccination plan to go ahead. Yes. So lobby your MEPs, please. This is how to stamp out bovine TB, not shooting our much loved wildlife. And across the country, people have taken to the streets in defence of the badger, one of Britain's most loved and iconic animals, and all of you here have come from all over, I believe, to do this today. You'll know that the government has recently announced a further 8-week extension to allow yet more badgers to be killed in Gloucester, despite the potentially drastic impact on pregnant sows and badgers' preparations for the winter. The prospect of badgers being culled in Sussex is now also facing us, and judging by all the local people that have contacted me about this issue, the people of Brighton Hove just won't stand for it. I applaud the fact that the Green Council have already pledged not to allow any culling on council-owned land, and we have to ensure that farmers and other landowners now do the same. I want to assure you that as Brighton Hove's local MP, I shouldn't say Hove, just Brighton's local MP, I am listening and stand resolutely at your side. I have called for the culling policy to be immediately scrapped and for no additional culls to be authorised without a vote in Parliament, and for MPs to be given the opportunity to properly scrutinise the results so far. There is no way that the 2 deeply flawed pilots held this year can be taken as definitive, and we should be using the reliable body of evidence built up over time to inform decision making. Badgers and their sets have been afforded legal protection in this country, yet continue to face numerous threats, including from snares, badger baiting road traffic and other forms of persecution. Let's not add any more gun-wielding farmers to that list. Let's call a halt to the culling now, and now focus instead on protecting our country's badgers and the future of British farming. Thank you very much.
Opposing the cull. It's the first time we've actually covered an issue of animal welfare, and we were absolutely gobsmacked by the energy and the dedication of the people up there taking direct action against this cruel and pointless fiasco. There's one woman who, when we interviewed her 2 weeks ago, she had been up there guarding the same badger sets for 70 days and nights, and by the time this is finished, she will have been doing that for over 120 days and nights. Another thing that we couldn't help noticing while we were up there is that many of the sets which are being targeted, and some of this action is completely illegal, they've been pouring rubble and broken glass into badger sets, right? But some of these sets are miles and miles away from any cattle or any farms. But by a staggering coincidence, they just happen to be very close to shoots. And now we know that badgers are quite partial to baby pheasants, so that leaves us wondering, is this cull really about protecting the profits of people who charge city gents £3,000 a day to blow overfed game birds from the sky? That's what it's really about. Just to finish, okay? For people who want to oppose this completely lawfully, the Wounded Badger Patrols up in Gloucestershire are doing an amazing job, and they need more people up there. For people who are willing to take a bit more of direct action, the 3 counties hunt sabs are also up there. They are coordinating a campaign with military precision. They need more people up there. They've arranged accommodation for people coming from outside of the area. Obviously people have commitments, people have jobs. If you can't go up there and help in person, by all means raise those groups a bit of money. They're doing an incredible job. But at the end of the 6-week period, The shooters have missed their targets by 75%. Right, let's make sure, get up there, help them out. Let's make sure that it continues to be a complete disaster for both the shooters and also for the government. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys. Now here is Dominic Dyer.
Woo! Hello to you.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
It's great to see the Badger Army come to Brighton.
Yeah.
We've done 7 towns and 7 cities in the last 2 months. We've gone from Kettering, Bedford, Taunton, Northampton. We've gone to Bristol. Well, we'll be going to Bristol at the end of the month. We were in Derby last week. Everywhere we go to, Manchester, we get bigger crowds, more people getting angry, more people saying enough is enough of this crazy, cruel Badger Cull. And as we get stronger, and as people get angrier, then Patterson and Cameron and all the people associated with this terrible, cruel policy are getting weaker. So just remember that. People power matters. The fact that you're coming out today, the fact that you're making your opinions clear, and that everyone else who can see you here today is important. So we keep this up. What I want to start with today is talking about the demonisation of badgers. Patrick Barkham, his wonderful book Badgerlands, if you've not read it, please get it. He was on Autumn Watch this week, and all credit to the BBC for actually getting an item on there about badgers. And he was talking about the demonisation of these animals. If we go back to the 17th and 18th century, agricultural workers would dig them out and put them in the inns and use them for hunting and use them for baiting in horrible circumstances where those animals would be kept for months until they were killed. And then we come into the 19th and 20th centuries with the colliery workers who would go baiting these badgers up and down the country, to the point in the 1950s and 60s that thousands of sets have been destroyed, to the point where the government could no longer close its eyes to the threat for these animals, and they brought in protection, important legal protection for badgers in the early 1970s. But here we are today, all these years later, 40 years on, and the demonisation is going on from the farming industry, and it's going on from the Conservatives and Liberal government in this coalition. They are now demonising badgers because of the way we farm in this country. They're blaming badgers who've lived in this country on this landscape for 500,000 years because they've got a disease, TB. They've got that disease because of intensive livestock systems in this country, because of dirty farming practices in this country, because governments, both Labour, Conservative, Liberal governments over the years have not done enough to address that. Let's be clear, we move 13 million animals in this country every year, more than anywhere else in Europe. And that's going up by hundreds of thousands every year. We moved in the last 6 years 78 million cattle in Britain. You know how many investigations we've had for TB-related fraud? 24. You know how many prosecutions that ended up with people getting fined? 11. That's all you had in all those 78 million movements. That means that farmers can quite happily alter cattle passports, can quite happily alter tags and other systems to move animals around illegally. They know they're not going to get caught. They know they can get away with it. And if you watched Inside Out, the BBC again, let's give them more credit. They did great programmes in the Northwest and Southwest a few weeks ago, and they showed yet again the weaknesses of these systems. In some places, no TB tests have been done for years. Cattle have been moved around illegally by farmers. Cattle are being moved in from Europe by farmers. Nothing is being done the way it should be. And that's what's causing this problem. Let's be clear, this is industrial pollution on a huge scale. And what we've seen over the last 40 years, it's got progressively worse. 1971 was the first case of a badger being seen with TB in this country. There were others before that. But since then, we've seen this disease spread and get much, much worse. And also, we've made some catastrophic decisions within the farming industry and the farm policy area. Let's go back to 2000. If you looked at the rate of TB in Britain at that time, we had a few thousand cases. It was no worse than most other parts of Europe. But then we had the foot and mouth crisis. We had a foot and mouth outbreak that was the biggest we'd seen in this country since 1967. It spread through the northwest and other parts of the country like wildfire. The government had a difficult choice to take, the Labour government under Tony Blair. There were many people that went to Blair, and I was in government at the time, including the Soil Association, the Prince of Wales and others, with a very sound policy of vaccination for cattle to stop the spread of that disease. They got approval from the European Union to do that. They set up major sheds in the northwest where they're going to bring thousands of cattle in to start vaccinating them. We had hundreds of vaccination teams ready to go. But then the National Farmers Union last minute decided they didn't want these cattle to be vaccinated. They didn't want to lose the opportunity to export live cattle to Europe and meat and dairy food. So they went to Tony Blair with the support of the food industry, and they basically turned that policy around overnight. Ben Gill, the president at the time, it's all there in the public domain, you can see it, and we decided then to slaughter the national herd. So we slaughtered over 4 million
cattle and sheep in this country. We shut down the countryside for 6 months. We delayed a general election. We spent over £8 billion in total in compensation to farmers and because of the economic cost of that. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, then the National Farmers Union decided they needed to restock cattle. And the chief veterinary officer and chief scientist at the time said, well, hold on a minute, we're going to have a problem because most of the places you don't have foot and mouth are in the southwest. We have small areas of foot and mouth there. And if you start restocking, what we do have is high levels of TB. But what did the NFU say at the time? We don't care about TB, we just want those cattle back in the systems. We want them moving again. So we moved hundreds of thousands of cattle up from the southwest across the country. 18 months later, we saw a trebling of TB rates in the herd in this country, a trebling. It went through the roof, not only in the cattle, but also in our badger community as well. You'd basically created a whole reservoir of disease in our wildlife. You'd polluted it, and no one took any responsibility for that at all. You can blame the last Labour government, but I also can blame the National Farmers Union for the ineptitude and for just not taking seriously a disease that they now say they want to kill our badgers for as a consequence. And if you go on, we just haven't done enough. We have made some progress at the beginning of this year in tightening down on biosecurity controls. The only reason for that is because the European Commission made the UK government and the farming industry do something about it. They said if you move 13 million animals in the way that you do, and if you cause the spread of this disease as a result, we've got to see some tightening down on biosecurity. So we have some tighter movement controls in place. We have tighter TB testing systems in place since January. And we've seen nearly a 4% reduction compared to last year in TB in the herds of this country. Have you seen that anywhere in press releases from the National Farmers Union? Have you seen that anywhere in press releases from Owen Patterson? Did he mention it in the EFRA Select Committee the other day? Did he, hell? The last thing they want to admit is that TB is actually getting under control through biosecurity, because that will take away the justification for this crazy badger cull. Let's be clear about that. Now then, a lot of people say to me, what is wrong with this policy? Where's the science? Where's the economic justification? Where's the animal welfare justification? Well, there isn't any. The reason this policy is going forward is because of politics. Let's be clear about that. Okay, you need to go back a few years. The last Labour government did the randomised badger cull. Okay, they took a tough decision. They decided they wanted to know once and for all as to whether they could prove that badgers being killed would reduce bovine TB. So they spent 15 million quid of your money. They killed 11,000 badgers and they took over 6 years to produce a report, the best peer-reviewed report in the world on this issue, with some of the most outstanding scientists involved with it, many of whom, to be fair, were highly criticised, including people like Lord Krebs, when they were undertaking this by animal rights groups. But when we finally got that report in 2008, it said, basically, that killing badgers and culling them in the way that we're doing at the moment will make no meaningful contribution to reducing bovine TB. And in fact, what it could do, it could make the situation worse through perturbation and disease spread. Okay? That's really important. Now, the Labour government accepted that fully and have developed their policy going forward as they did up to 2010. Now, David Cameron in opposition was given that report. His ministers, opposition team, including Jim Pace, were given that report. They took about 10 minutes, they looked at it and threw it out the window. They didn't want to know about all the science, they didn't want to know about all the money that had been spent, they didn't want to know about the 11,000 dead badgers. All they cared about is they'd promised the National Farmers Union, they'd promised the Countryside Alliance, that if they came into office, they would cull badgers no matter what. Now, there were some, including Jim Pace, who was a farmer, to be fair, and I've worked with, who believed this was right, but there were many others who didn't care about the science, they just wanted good politics. There were votes in this, let's be clear about it. In 2010, in many seats in certain parts of the country, those votes from the Countryside Alliance, many of whom were actually out there supporting Conservative candidates, who are now in office in Parliament, who support this cull. The chief executive, the former chief executive of the Countryside Alliance, is now an MP as well, in Parliament, supporting this cull. There's such a close connection between the campaigning and the people making the decision-making process. That is not illegal. There was nothing done wrong about it, but it was all done behind the scenes. And now this government tries to dress all this up as a science policy. It's not. It's political. And that's what makes it so fundamentally wrong. Now, the only way you can sell a political policy like the badger cull, because it's so rubbish, let's be clear about it, is by creating a number of myths and then trying to take those myths to people so they think, oh, it seems a fair deal. So what do? That's myth number one. Badgers are full of TB. I've been on the radio and television. Mr. Patterson never stays long enough to debate me. He always goes in early and he says his piece and he disappears. One of his favourite pieces is, listen, there's loads of badgers out there that are basically excreting disease, they're exploding with disease. Over 40% of them are dying on their feet, and we've got to kill them. If we kill them, we're doing them a favour, and then we're going to have fat, healthy badgers as a result, okay? Well, the randomised badger cull told us something very important. The numbers of badgers that had disease at late stage, that were excreting it in the way that Owen Patterson was explaining, of those 11,000 animals killed was only 1.5%. There was 15% of those animals in that 11,000 killed that had early stage of this TB, but it wasn't impacting their health. They were a low risk of spreading it, and they would go through their 3 or 4 year life cycle and probably show no negative health symptoms at all. So that's one massive lie that you can put to bed straight away. The other thing he says is the cost of this. He says that we're going to spend £1 billion in the next 10 years unless we get on top of bovine TB. That means 100 million quid a year is being spent. That is absolute rubbish. We're spending about 30 to 40 million pounds a year on average. That's a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but it's far less than 100 million pounds. And he's getting 10 million quid back because he sells all that TB reactor meat to you and me if you eat meat with no labelling and no traceability. Of the 30,000 TB reactor cows last year that came out of the system was slaughtered, 28,000 went into the food chain. More of them went into breaks, went into Compass and in food groups like that. They're going to our schools, they're going to our hospitals, and when we're thinking about Remembrance Day, they're going to our armed forces in Afghanistan as well. And then he has the cheek, when he was at the EFRA Select Committee the other day, to get one of his MPs to ask him about the threat to our dear tiddles and cats from TB. But we're also putting a lot of that TB meat into the cat food industry as well. You ask Whiskers. Whiskers won't sell it, but Tesco's put it in their own label TB. Meat is going into their own label cat food. So there might be a small risk, yeah, because Owen Patterson is creating it in his TB meat business. Let's be clear about that. So all these issues just don't add up. And then you go forward into these pilot culls.
Save the badger! Save the badger!